He's a colleague of mine. Always enjoy working with him, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome him to Ann Arbor, and Dr. Robert Bertini.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's great to be here. It's a little bit difficult to be the last speaker in the next few minutes between you and the reception, but I'll try to be quick. And first, I want to wish you all a happy National Bike to Work Day today. I did not bike here. I biked to work yesterday, but today my day started in Washington about 5:30 this morning, and so I'm glad finally to be doing at this moment what I got up at that time to start doing. And so today I wanted to talk about some of the U.S. policies towards sustainable transportation. And as Peter mentioned, just the Research and Innovative Technology Administration is a relatively new operating administration at the U.S. DOT. We're one of 10 operating administrations. We were created in 2006, and we focus on research, data, and education. Of course, across the U.S., some of these numbers have been thrown out today, so I'm not going to read them all to you, but at the U.S. Department of Transportation, we think a lot about safety and the cost of the fatalities and injuries and property damage crashes that occur every year. We also focus a lot on mobility, accessibility, and reliability. But today, really, we're here to talk about the impact of the U.S. transportation sector on the environment. And I remember in my initial interview for this position at RITA, it's a political appointment, part of the it's a presidential appointment, and I remember talking with the leadership at the DOT about our responsibility as transportation professionals, since the transportation sector does account for almost a third of the greenhouse gas emissions in this country, roughly a third of U.S. energy consumption, almost all petroleum. And so we do bear a responsibility. We view that we have a responsibility on our shoulders for dealing with that, for reducing the footprint of the transportation sector. And we do take seriously the long-standing definition of sustainability, that we want to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. When thinking about solutions to greenhouse gas emissions in transportation, we usually think of four areas, some of which have been, I guess all of which have been talked about to some degree today, and will continue to be tomorrow. Vehicle technology, fuel technology, vehicle miles traveled, and vehicle system operations. And I'm just going to say one or two words about each one of those very quickly. And of course, the U.S. DOT and the U.S. government and many of our stakeholders, states and local agencies, and importantly the private sector as well, are all involved in these initiatives. We're working on greener conventional vehicles and alternative fueled vehicles of all kinds. Most of this work in terms of the research is handled at the Department of Energy, though our sister agency, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, deals with regulating light vehicles, and we at RITA have several research initiatives in alternative fuels. The fuels technology themselves, again, the Department of Energy, our sister agency, sister cabinet agency, deals a lot with this, but we do have some programs at RITA and across DOT focusing on fuel technologies, biofuels in particular. So these images are just meant to sort of inspire you to think about, well, how do we reduce the extent of our transport or make our transport more efficient? And of course, there are lots of ways to do that. I think Peter already mentioned that we've seen a reduction in VMT per capita over the last few years, perhaps attributable to lots of things, but certainly the unemployment rate and the economy and so on. But there are lots of things that we're trying to be proactive about in shifting travelers to other modes of transportation, thinking about land use. Transportation is not an end in and of itself for most people, although Professor Pat Mokhtarian at UC Davis has some research that shows that there are people who simply do travel for the sake of travel, but for most of the VMT that's out there, it's a means to an end. And I think we need to be sure that we recognize that transportation is linked to other things and it doesn't exist in and of itself. And so a lot of our initiatives, some of which I'll talk about in a minute, are aimed in that direction. One of the areas that I personally have been involved with as a professor and as a researcher, and most recently this last year as acting director of the Intelligent Transportation Systems program at the US DOT, is thinking about making vehicles and the system itself. As Peter described, we have a system. There isn't one person managing that whole system. It's a bunch of parts that have adapted and evolved over time. But we're at the DOT focused a lot on the next generation of vehicles, connected vehicles, and the next generation of system operations. Some of the examples that we're focused on, I'll say a little more about. A few of them in a bit. Eco-driving, focused on transportation demand management, managing transit systems and transportation systems more holistically and more efficiently and effectively, developing through our research in partnership with the auto industry, the next generation of intelligent vehicles, and thinking about corridors. I mean, we have major passenger and freight corridors in this country, and we have some initiatives underway where we're looking at how do we manage a corridor more efficiently without just thinking about an individual mode, highway, transit, et cetera. So thinking more holistically about how the system works across modes of transportation. So speaking about, in this session, talking about national policy, there are different places where the nation's, let's say, transportation policy related to sustainability resides. One, the first place that I wanted to mention is President Obama's energy security program that he announced just a month or so ago on March 30th, and I've extracted some of the relevant components of that. It's much broader in terms of the overall energy needs of this country, but the overall goal, the single goal, is to reduce oil imports by 1/3 by 2025. And some of the transportation components of that, subcomponents of that, include development of more efficient cars and trucks, and a lot of this is being done at the US DOT, in particular investing in advanced vehicles, fuels, technologies, high-speed rail, and public transit. Previous speakers have mentioned fuel economy standards. We do have a new fuel economy standard for the period for passenger vehicles through 2016. In September of this year, we'll be announcing the fuel economy standards for the period 2017 to 2025. And pretty soon in July, we'll be announcing, I say we, I mean the DOT in partnership with the Environmental Protection Agency, we'll be announcing the first ever fuel economy standards for commercial trucks, vans, and buses for the vehicles that are manufactured between 2014 and 2018. So we're very excited about that. Another commitment the President made was to getting 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2015. He's come out very clearly in support of a tax credit, of competitive community grants for charging infrastructure and so on, and for continuing through the Department of Energy R&D in the area of batteries. He also stated an initiative to encourage legislation that will encourage natural gas vehicles. And then, of course, as a federal agency at the DOT, we're focused on our own fleet. The DOT does have a fleet. The federal government has a fleet of about 600,000 vehicles. Just in the last couple of years, we've doubled the number of hybrid vehicles, and the goal is that by 2015, all new vehicles for the federal fleet, many of them are leased, some are owned, will be alternative fuel. So that's sort of a quick snapshot at the White House level of what's going on. At the DOT, Peter talked about the 1990 transportation policy document. If you want to know what the policy of this administration's transportation department is, you can look at Secretary LaHood's 5 priorities. There is a draft strategic plan for the Department of Transportation that's pretty clear about what our priorities are. There's also on our website the 2012 President's Budget. We talk in terms of fiscal years, so it's the FY 2012 budget for the Department of Transportation. That's also a very clear statement, a very clear reflection of these priorities and the strategic plan. And ultimately, the full-fledged administration legislative proposal, if there are any lawyers who like reading legislative language, that document is on its way out. It's circulating around Capitol Hill. But if you really want to understand what our policies are, look at these 5 priorities. And it's very clear, if you've ever looked at the Secretary's blog or Twitter feed or Facebook page or heard him speak that safety is our number one priority. I think that's different than the 1990 policy where safety was down there somewhere. But safety is number one, and it's absolutely clear that we see safety on the transportation system a public health issue, and that we're working hard every day to reduce fatalities and injuries. State of good repair is the second priority. And it's the foundation for our economy. And so many of these priorities are linked. Economic competitiveness, it's especially relevant during this economic downturn the crisis that we've been in. I mean, transportation, it's been proven throughout the centuries or the millennia, you might say, that transportation is the lifeblood of the economy of a city or town or region or country or the overall planet. I'll talk a little bit more about livable communities, specifically in the area of environmental sustainability. The goal is to advance policies that reduce carbon and other harmful emissions. And the Secretary speaks very often that sustainability must be a principle reflected in all of our investments across all modes. If you look at the draft strategic plan, there are 4 outcomes and some specific performance metrics. This administration and this transportation department is extremely performance-driven from various perspectives, from our budget to various report cards about sustainability and other issues that are very visible on the White House website, on the DOT website, the agency. The transportation department, as an owner of fleets and buildings, is being rated and scored very visibly on the website as well. So some of the metrics here for sustainability do apply to the agency as a landlord. A lot of the transportation programs that are funded through the US DOT are actually implemented by other agencies, by state departments of transportation and so on. So we have to recognize that this is a partnership. Just a few details about this executive order about federal leadership in environmental, energy, and economic performance. The President issued this back in 2009. The aim is by 2020, the government itself will reduce our greenhouse gas pollution by 28%. And so for us at DOT, we have a pretty detailed strategic plan that's just being updated as we speak in the next several days. It will be the second year's revision will be posted on our website. But it's actually been interesting, just anecdotally, having moved to Washington from Oregon. I remember on my first day, I printed something on the printer, and it came out single-sided with a cover sheet. And the cover sheet had all this stuff with my name on it and the name of the document. And I just asked the IT people, I said, well, I tried turning off the cover sheet, and it would turn off for one document, but then the next time I printed something, the cover sheet would be back. And so I'm the new deputy administrator. I said, well, this is really annoying. Can we get rid of these cover sheets? And so the IT person didn't talk to anyone, just changed the little toggle switch wherever it was. And so then all the people who really wanted those cover sheets all of a sudden weren't getting them, and they were lining up outside my door complaining, telling me I had to buy them their own printers. But anyway, so we sort of changed the culture slightly over the last 2 years. We now have default double-sided printing, default no cover sheets. People can add them if they want, but it's a culture change, and just within the agency with our 60,000 employees, we do have a big footprint. We use a lot of paper, and the shift has been growing a little bit. I know that's not transportation-related stuff, but it's important. There are a couple other initiatives within the department that I wanted to mention that I think are important, and one of the things that some of you may have heard about was the Tiger program, and it was basically a new form of competitive grant making. We've gone through 2 cycles. The key criteria for this program included projects that created jobs, that stimulated economic activity and improved liability. So we think one of the most important things is to spur innovation and spur competition for the federal funds that are out there. Of course, a lot of the federal funds flow through formulas, but this Tiger program will be entering its 3rd phase. And I think we saw a lot of very innovative solutions from across the country, across all modes. It was a very interesting process. It brought people together inside the DOT who don't normally work together. So we had transit people and maritime people and highway people and railroad people working together evaluating these proposals. And so we think that one of the most important things, in addition to reminding you again that transportation is not an end in itself, that we want local communities innovations to come forward. So we're very excited about this program. We do have a livability initiative that I think is important to mention because it reflects the fact that really for the first time transportation, the Transportation Department, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development are working together. I know because I'm on the email list. I get all the emails about all the meetings and all the different programs that are underway. So this partnership for sustainable communities I think is really important to spend just a minute talking about. As Peter mentioned before, there are 6 criteria or 6 goals for this partnership: providing more transportation choices, developing equitable, affordable housing, enhancing economic competitiveness, supporting existing communities, coordinating policies and leveraging investments among the 3 entities, and valuing what's unique about communities, whether urban, suburban, or rural, or everything in between. And so I think this program has been really valuable and innovative. And it's been interesting to see, frankly, that it is kind of difficult for big federal agencies to work together. But once the individual people start working together, it sort of breaks down those barriers. So we're very much about breaking down the traditional stovepipes, whether it's between modes of transport or between functions of the federal government. Just a little bit about, so we have the DOT strategic plan. We'll soon be releasing a draft of our research, development, and technology strategic plan, and there of course is a whole chapter on sustainability, and so hopefully those of you who are interested can take a look at that once it goes up on our website in the next small number of months, we hope, or less, and give us some feedback on what you think about our R&D priorities for sustainability. We do at RETA, we house the DOT Climate Change Center, and you can find that at climate.dot.gov and learn a little bit more about what we've been doing in climate. I'm going to kind of skip because I think I'm over time here. We have the Alternative Fuels program that I mentioned. Again, more information available on our website. I wanted to talk a little bit about intelligent transportation systems and what we're doing in that. Peter serves on our advisory our ITS program advisory council committee, something like that, advisory committee. And we are in the process of implementing a strategic plan that was released early in 2010, and the 3 goals of the ITS program include safety, mobility, and the environment. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the environmental goal. We call that program ARIS, Applications for the Environment, Real-Time Information Synthesis, because this is new for us. And I think it's extremely important. Basically, the vision is that the transportation system of the future, all kinds of vehicles and users of the system, will be generating data. So we envision this data environment where, I mean, we have this now, where certain vehicles and certain users of the system are generating data. But what do we do with it, and how do we manage it, and how do we operationalize it and leverage it to reduce emissions and reduce fuel consumption? So the eco-driving presentation we heard earlier about smoothing out driving, we think that's going to be a very important component, and we think that there will be other ways that vehicles can communicate with the infrastructure. For example, traffic signal systems. We've shown in many demonstrations in the field that if you have vehicles communicating with the traffic signals, that you can actually optimize those systems, reduce the number of stops, reduce delay, reduce emissions, and reduce fuel. Because of course the traffic signals are operating at capacity for a few hours per day, but in the off-peak periods, you're still sort of operating these signals in what can become a slightly inefficient way. So if you know where the vehicles are and you know when they're going to arrive at the actual intersection, you can adjust the timing in real time. So I encourage you to, if you're interested, again, we've got a lot of information on our website about the ARIS program, and we're excited about this program moving forward. Before I close, and maybe there'll be some time for some questions, I did want to say that we believe in public service at the US DOT, and any of you students who are interested, you know, we hire interns And despite the negative things you hear about the federal government and its budget, we do hire people because people do retire. So we do very regularly have positions at the U.S. DOT, and I encourage you to check us out if you're interested. I guess maybe one last thing. We've been working a lot with the European Commission, and it was interesting to compare kind of what's happening in Europe with what's happening in the U.S. The European Commission just released their 2011 white paper for transportation in Europe, and I thought I would just kind of throw this out there, that they are making a commitment across Europe to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 60%. They have 10 specific goals, which is basically by 2050 for major cities to phase out conventional fueled vehicles in cities. They're aiming to cut them in half by 2030, and they're in the freight area aiming to go CO2 free for city logistics for freight movement in cities by 2030. They're also making setting some big goals in aviation by 2050. They're focused on freight to improve supply chain efficiency, and they have a big emphasis on information systems for transportation and moving toward zero fatalities by 2050 as well. They're focused on 4 mechanisms to make this happen: developing an internal market within Europe, innovation, of course, infrastructure, and an international component. So it's kind of interesting. There are, you can go to the European Commission website, the White Paper 2011, and read more about it. You might say that they're maybe a little more specific in the transportation arena. The European Commission is a lot different than the US DOT, but it's interesting to compare what's happening. So in terms of trying to conclude, there's maybe not a lot more that I can add to what's already been said, but I would say that from our perspective at RITA, we want to emphasize the value of research, data, and scientific advancements in improving the sustainability, dramatically improving the sustainability of our transportation system. I think giving people more choices, as has been mentioned earlier, is a really critical part of it. Trying to spur innovation from wherever it can come from academia, from private industry, from the federal government, or perhaps partnerships among those 3 entities. We know that there are great ideas out there. We know that in Washington we don't have all the answers, and so we're anxious to hear from the rest of the transportation community and from universities like this one. I think there are lots of little things that can be done in local communities. Trying to communicate best practices across communities, and thinking about equity across our country, at least in terms of capabilities, because there are innovations occurring in some communities that have, let's say, large transportation agencies, but let's not forget about the rural areas that may not have the staffing level, they may not have the funding to hire consultants or to hire university students to help them with research and so on. So we should think about how we can take a lesson learned in one community, an experience or an innovation, and transfer it easily to another community. So that's something that we're also very interested in. So with that, I think I'll close, and thank you very much for this opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the federal level here in the U.S. And if we have time for questions, I'd be very happy to try to answer some. Thank you.